All right, let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining today. A quick intro. My name is Kait. I'm one of the AI specialists at Forum3. I've been using AI every single day for work for almost the past 3 years, and I've learned some cool things along the way, so I'm really excited to get to share them with you today. The goal for today's session is by the end of this demo, you should know the real difference between chat, Cowork, and even code, how to actually talk to Claude so that it gives you something really good. We're going to go through the Cowork basics and where this is heading with skills and scheduled tasks. I'll be switching back and forth between the slide deck and my own Cowork, so if you like, please feel free to follow along at home. And please, as we go through this demo, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. Let's talk about the main access points to to Claude. The two ways to access Claude would be through web or versus desktop. Claude actually just made a recent change where Cowork is now available on both the web and desktop. So knowing which path to take to access your Cowork isn't as important as it used to be, but it's still good to know. The main difference to note between web versus desktop is that desktop only really matters once you need it touching your local files or if you need your Cowork driving your screen. Today, we'll be using the desktop app for the demo and to show you guys how to use Cowork, but the UI on both is almost identical, so you can follow along on either your web or your desktop app. Now let's get into what you can actually do on each of those access paths. So whether you are on the web or you are on your desktop app, you will get access to chat and to Cowork. I like to think of chat as the brain. All three, chat, Cowork, and code, have the brain, but Cowork is where you will actually grow arms and legs, and Cowork can take action on your behalf. That's the big difference between chat and between Cowork. And then third, code was built specifically for engineers, and we won't be going into it too deeply on today's demo. Let's get into how to talk to your Claude and how to talk to it effectively. So as we get into it, no matter if you are on chat or if you are on Cowork, the prompt is important to just know about. There used to be an art form to prompting, right? You would start with a specific formula of information and go through it. Nowadays, AI is actually pretty well knowledgeable where it can take any kind of information that you're giving it and create good output. That does not mean less information is better, though. The basic and most important thing to remember as you're prompting your Claude is that you want to give it the information that it needs in order to complete that task. So a not so great prompt would look kind of similar to being one sentence long, right? It's write a summary of our sales call this week. That might get you a somewhat good output on your chat or your Cowork. It will try to do that for you. But if you give it more context, it's going to immediately know more things and give you a much better output. So when we look at this prompt, a way to make this prompt even better is to just give it more context and turning that into something that looks more like summarize this week's sales calls into a one-page brief for our VP of sales. You're giving it the context, you're telling it who this is for, and you're telling it what the output should be. You then give it more context and say, I want the two biggest objections that we heard in that sales call. So you're already talking to what happened in that call, giving it a little bit of a focus, one line each on how the rep handled them, and a single recommendation for what to adjust in the pitch next week. Keep it skimmable. She's reading this between meetings. That kind of context is going to allow Cowork to know it needs to be short. Now I know what the output is and I know who the audience is for, so I'm going to write it for that audience member. So that's prompting. Another thing that goes into prompting. So it's important as you get started in your Cowork and your chat is to understand the basic terms. And so understanding that the prompt is just the text that you are feeding Claude is good to know. And then there's a more general term for when you're talking to Cowork, and that is going to be your context. Your context is going to include basically everything that is needed in order to complete that task, not just the text, not just the question that you're asking Cowork, but it's going to include more like your files that are needed or any photos. Potentially there's a screenshot that Cowork needs to see in order to actually understand the problem. Any of your projects, any files, any Excel workbooks, and skills as well, which we'll get into a little bit later in this demo. So that is what context is, but there's also ways where you can get Cowork to get more context out of you. So you might have a very limited amount of time and you just need to send the prompt off and have Cowork to start working. You might not have the time to just sit there and think about everything that it needs. A really great way to get your Cowork to understand all the context that it needs, not just the files, not just the screenshots, but also the additional information that is only in your brain that you can give it, that you can relay to Cowork, is by asking Cowork to interview you. Have a brainstorm with Cowork and say, hey, I'm sure there is stuff that I'm missing here in telling you and giving you the full background. Ask me questions. What do you not know that you need in order to move forward on this project? One of our examples here is, if you were asking your Cowork to put together an agenda for a leadership meeting next week, you can say, ask me 5 sharp questions and then build me an agenda based on my answers. That's going to have Cowork kick off an interview with you and ask you questions. You can have it go on for as long as you like, or you can end it when you think it has enough context to complete the task. There's ways that Cowork can really help you get this context. So don't be worried that if you send off a task and you don't think you gave it all the context, that now it's going to give you a terrible output. You can always say, hey, I don't think you have the full context of this task. Interview me, ask me questions so that you can close those knowledge gaps. So that's prompting, that's context. But let's get into the models and how to use them. We're now going to actually navigate to our Cowork in a quick moment. So Cowork has 4 models right now that you are able to choose from. You're going to want to pay attention to the model that you are using before you send anything on Cowork. The 4 models that are available right now are Haiku, Sonnet, Opus, and Fable 5. I will admit, just being fully transparent here as an AI specialist who uses AI every single day, I rarely touch Fable 5 and Haiku. The lightest and the heaviest are actually, they're fine, but they are not going to be your day-to-day, your bread and butter like Sonnet. Sonnet is ultimately the model that you're going to want to use most often. It doesn't use as much of your usage, and it has enough power to it to complete 98% of your tasks. And then whenever I have something that requires, more than 5 or 6 steps, or requires extreme data analysis, or just working with very, very, very big sets of data, I will then switch my model to Opus for more heavy reasoning and a little bit more juice behind the prompt and behind the answer that Cowork is going to build for me. I like to kind of talk to Sonnet and Opus as Sonnet is my minivan. It gets me from point A to point B. Maybe not in style, but it does the job and it is great. Opus is more of my Ferrari. I don't necessarily want to be driving my Ferrari to the grocery store. So I'm only going to reserve Opus for the highest tasks that I need. And I will admit, I've only used Fable 5 a handful of times on the largest projects. It is good, but it is a lot of power and it uses a lot of usage. And every time I've used Fable 5, I walk away saying, I think I could have used Opus for that and used less of my usage. So let's get into how you can actually start to prompt your Cowork. I'm going to go into how to select these models, but really quickly, just to show you guys, this is the web version of Claude, and then this is the desktop version. They look pretty identical. Yeah, so as I'm starting, as I prompt, this is where I'm going to input any kind of text, any kind of information that I want my cowork to know. I can add files. I can even record me on my screen if I want my cowork to know how I do a certain process. We have skills and connectors and plugins, which we'll get into in a moment. And you also have your projects and your folders here, where if you like to stay hyper organized, you can keep all of your information regarding one project or one process or one client all grouped together in one folder or one project. So for me, we have a few. I default to always using the folder that I'm working in. So I do always typically choose a folder. And then getting back to what I was mentioning with the models. So this is where you are going to probably want to spend a little bit of time thinking about, especially as you're getting started in your cowork, before you send any chat. This is where you're going to select which model. As I said earlier, I use Sonnet for 98% of the work that I do, so I constantly just stay in Sonnet for the majority of my tasks. And then there's also a secondary item that you can add to your model, which is the effort level. So this is going to be where how much time Cowork is spending thinking through your problem. So you can see here, I was just working on a very low effort task. So my model was set to Sonnet and then my effort was set to low. If I had something that, needed a little bit more attention or more thought behind it, and I really wanted Sonnet to think through it instead of maybe just pulling something quickly, that is where I would go to either high, extra, or max for those kinds of items. And then you have effort levels on all of the four. So I will say there's not really many Opus tasks that I will do that needs anything higher than a high effort. And that's for my most complex things that I'll be giving Cowork. So truly, I do think as you guys are getting started, use Sonnet for the majority of your asks and your projects that you're working on with Cowork. But the other thing I just want to encourage is to test them out. Maybe if you have a little bit of usage, you can send the exact same prompt to Opus and the exact same prompt to Sonnet, open two new chats. See what the output is. I guarantee you Sonnet is going to be faster, and I guarantee you Opus will probably include more sources and more things like that for you to comb through. It'll be a little bit more built out. So then you can start to understand which model you need to use for which task. So going back to the models, each model will use usage differently. So Haiku is going to use the lowest amount of usage. It's going to be for very, very quick things. Like I mentioned, Fable 5 is going to use a lot. So how you can know your speedometer, if you will, of where your settings are, where your usage is to just click into your settings and then navigate to your usage, which is on the usage tab. You can see my current session. This is every 12 hours for me. It resets. Depending on the account and the way that your organization has set it up, it might be slightly different from you. It might be every 4 hours. But you can see my session is currently only at 17%, and it will reset in just under an hour. But we also have weekly limits. So for all of my models for this week, it's Thursday, I'm at 46% of my weekly usage. If this runs out, I have a few options. It's not the end of the world. There are the best way to move forward if you ever run out of usage is to contact your org admin. There are ways where they can give you a little bit of extra usage. So if in the off chance you are so close to finishing a huge project and all of a sudden usage is just out, that might be a great time to go to your org admin and say, hey, I just need $10 extra. Please assign that to my account and I can finish this project. However, there is also something to be said about the art of knowing which model to choose. And so if you are just defaulting to Opus for everything, I highly recommend changing that habit, trying to teach yourself to use Sonnet for pretty much anything that you were using Opus for. Truly see the difference and see if Sonnet can't do what you were asking, but I have yet to give Sonnet a task that it cannot do. So I would truly highly recommend, for your own sake of your own usage going as far as it can, defaulting to Sonnet is a pretty great way to start. All right, so that's models and usage. Let's get into memory. I think this is something that is a bit interesting that Cowork does, but every single Cowork account that is new will have its memory defaulted to off. So for some reason, that's just what they do. And so in order to change that, you would go to your settings. And what memory is going to allow your cowork to do is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be able to remember things about you, things that you tell it. And it is important to note that when you turn it on in settings, that's across any of the faces of Claude, whether that be chat, whether that be cowork, or whether that be code. Whichever form you're using, the settings is it affects all three of those. So you can turn it on once and never again. You would do that by going into your capabilities on your settings. And it's these two first toggles right here. So the first toggle, searching and referencing your chats. I highly recommend toggling this on. This will allow you to open up a new chat and say, hey, I was working on this awesome thing with you 3 days ago and I can't find that chat anymore. Can we pick up where we left off? And it will then be able to find that other chat, read what happened, and then pick up where it left off. But then also the second toggle, which I think is just as important as the first, is generating memory from chat history. You want it to be able to remember the things that you're giving it in long context windows. If you have a very long conversation, that is something that is contextual gold, and you want it to remember that for next time. So again, if you take anything away from this demo today, I would recommend it be these two toggles being in your settings. It's going to give you a different cowork, to be fully honest. Your cowork will then be able to remember not just what you're telling it now, but it will remember it for later. That's memory. And then we'll get into connectors as well very quickly. Connectors are a bridge between your cowork and an external platform. Things like Asana, like project management tools, or Gmail, or Outlook, or Google Drive, or Linear, things like that. Once you have a connector set up, that means that your cowork has the ability to go into that platform and perform actions on your behalf. There's two quick things to note about this that's really important. One is that your cowork will only inherit the permissions that you have. So if you do not have access to a platform and you try to connect it to your cowork, it will not have access to that platform because you do not have access to that platform, and vice versa as well. If you have access, it will then have that access. The second thing that is important to note is that you can control these connectors. So as you connect them, I would highly recommend clicking into any one of them, and you can then see which features it has. So here you can see my Gmail connector has the ability to get an email message, right? Just to get it. It's a read-only tool, so that means it's only reading. It's not acting on my behalf. It's not sending anything on my behalf. It's not notifying anyone on my behalf. And so this is something where my read-only tool is set to always allow. However, if we come down here, create draft email, for example, that is something that is then being done on my Gmail account. I do not want my cowork to be doing this without asking me first, always. And so what I have set it to is I have set it to always ask, always ask, which is this little hand up here. It pauses and it needs approval, and it will ask me in that chat before it drafts anything in my Gmail. And then I will know exactly what it's doing. I highly recommend, if you connect anything, set everything at first to needs approval. As you get more and more comfortable with what your connector is doing on that platform, then and only then you can set it to always allow. But I still even then would recommend read-only tools can be always allow if you want and you trust it. Write or delete tools, I just would truly recommend, for your own sake, to set these to always ask, because you do want it to always be asking you whenever it's doing something on your behalf. So that's connectors. That is the basics of your Cowork and your Cowork account. So that is what you need to set up in order to use it effectively. But let's now talk about how you can use it to your benefit. So we talked about memory and context. What you can do with your memory and context is you can turn that into a skill. This is just a reusable playbook that your Cowork will write itself. You do not have to worry about any setup or any writing of this file. It will write it for you if you ask it. And what you can do with that skill, with that playbook of instructions, is you can then say, you can keep it as a skill and trigger it anytime. Or you can say, hey, I want this skill to be on a schedule. Every single Friday, I have to build this stakeholder email. I have a skill for it. It has the format, the audience, the data, where to get this, where to get that, what to call out, and how I like it. Now I'm going to turn that skill into a scheduled task so that every Friday it triggers itself and it will draft that email for me in my Cowork, and I can either copy and paste it into my Gmail, or I can give it feedback and I can iterate with it. But that means that then your skill file that you have is auto triggering itself. And by the time that you log in on your Friday morning, it will have that draft ready to go for your review. I know that we only have 4 minutes left, and I really want to end with some Q&A, see if anybody has any questions. We didn't get into the demo today, but that's okay. I'm sure we can send out a quick informational video after this. But does anybody have any questions on this Cowork demo? And I'm looking at the public chat right now. I see Kelly asked, do I need to be an admin for this? I think that's a great question. For user settings, while admins do have a lot more controls, you do not need to be an admin to access your individual settings. And then Jennifer, thank you for asking. She asked, what is an example of a low-level task? I think that's a great question. I think anything that is not going to need a ton of context or information. So for example, rewriting an email. That is not something that will most likely, if it's just a rewrite, you won't need files. You won't need a multi-step process. You will give it the email and tell it what tone you want, and it will rewrite that email for you. That is something that I would go to Haiku for. I don't even use Haiku that often. That is such a low-level task of just rewriting that I would probably go to Haiku or Sonnet Low for something like that. For a more complex task, I would consider that to be something where there's probably more than 5 or 6 files of context, 3 or 4 call transcripts, and probably 5 or 6 steps to the task. That is something I would consider like something very high level. Does that answer your question, Jennifer? Happy to get into it more. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining. I absolutely love any chance I get to nerd about Cowork. So thank you all. And we will make sure that my email address is sent around. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ping me. Again, big nerd about this stuff. So I love to talk about it and would love to hear any other questions if anyone has any. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your Thursday and a great weekend, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all.